The sun hung low over the sprawling Texas desert, casting long shadows across the chain-link fences and concrete barriers of Fort Sterling. A black SUV rolled toward the main checkpoint, its tires crunching against the gravel, leaving clouds of dust swirling behind it. Two young gate guards, fresh from basic training and still glowing with the excitement of uniforms and authority, straightened in their posts as the vehicle slowed to a halt. Their hands instinctively hovered near the radios clipped to their belts, eyes scanning the driver with a mix of suspicion and professional caution. The driver's side door opened with a quiet click, and a woman stepped out. Her movements were deliberate, poised, and calm. She was dressed in simple civilian clothing, no insignia, no uniform, no visible indication of her authority. To the guards, she appeared ordinary, another visitor with clearance issues. But there was something in her stance, a subtle energy that spoke of discipline and control, that made them hesitate for a fraction of a second too long. "Ma'am, you can't enter without authorization," one of the guards said, raising a firm hand as if to physically block her passage. He tried to keep his tone neutral, professional, yet his voice carried the undercurrent of authority he had only recently learned to wield. The woman looked at him steadily. She said nothing, simply produced an identification folder from her leather satchel and extended it. The guard took it, flipping through the pages, scanning her credentials. Her name, Colonel Samantha Hayes, caught his attention, but he didn't immediately recognize it. "Colonel Hayes?" he asked, voice a mixture of doubt and confusion. "Yes," she replied, her tone calm but carrying a weight that instantly silenced any impulse to argue. "I am here to assume command of this base." The young guard froze, caught between protocol and the unfamiliarity of the situation. His partner's eyes widened, and both glanced at the radio, debating whether to call the duty officer or assume it was a clerical error. The woman's expression remained unreadable, but there was an unmistakable air of authority about her, the kind that didn't ask for respect, it simply commanded it. Finally, one of them spoke into the radio, his voice tight with tension. "Sir, we have a civilian at the gate claiming to be Colonel Hayes. We need verification." As they waited, the woman shifted her weight slightly, scanning the checkpoint, the fences, the distant barracks. Everything about this base was familiar to her, yet everything had changed since she had last been here. Fort Sterling had always been more than just buildings and roads. It was a living organism of strategy, discipline, and camaraderie. And now it had fallen into neglect. That realization tightened her jaw for a moment, but she said nothing aloud. Minutes stretched as the guards transmitted her information up the chain of command. Their radios crackled with static and brief snippets of confusion, a tense symphony of protocol in motion. Finally, a senior officer appeared at the gate, a lieutenant with a clipboard and a hesitant expression. His eyes fell on the ID, scanned the name, and then shot toward her face. His jaw slackened slightly, disbelief written across it. "Oh, ma'am," he stammered, his voice wavering. "Colonel Hayes, I didn't realize." "You didn't have to," she interrupted gently, but firmly. "You did your job. That's all that matters." For a moment, there was silence. The desert wind carried the faint hum of distant generators, the low murmur of soldiers moving about the base, and the subtle tension of a checkpoint disrupted. The young guard shifted uneasily, suddenly aware of the gravity of the moment. Here they were, thinking they were enforcing routine rules, only to realize they had unknowingly delayed the arrival of the very person they were meant to serve. Samantha didn't linger on the moment. She stepped forward, her boots crunching against the gravel, moving past the gate as the lieutenant quickly waved the guards aside. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced far greater dangers than a moment of misunderstanding at a checkpoint. She had survived hostile fire in Afghanistan, orchestrated strategic missions under extreme pressure, and led men and women through operations that demanded precision, courage, and unwavering authority. A routine checkpoint on an American base was now nothing more than a minor obstacle. As she passed through, the guards watched, still processing the enormity of what had just occurred. One of them whispered, barely audible, That was Colonel Hayes?" His partner nodded slowly, eyes wide, a mix of awe and embarrassment coloring his expression. They realized that the woman who had stood silently while they questioned her was not only a decorated officer, but also the new commander who would shape their lives, their work, and the future of this base. Inside Fort Sterling, Samantha took a moment to survey her surroundings. The barracks, the parade grounds, and the training fields were familiar, yet they carried the unmistakable signs of neglect, rusted equipment, faded markings, and a sense of dormancy that had settled over the base in the absence of leadership. Her mind raced, analyzing priorities, strategies, and immediate tasks. But she did so silently, knowing that first impressions would matter, and that every officer and soldier would be watching her next moves. She reached for her folder, reviewing her orders once more. Every detail was in place. The transition of command was official, documented, and irrevocable. Yet she knew that paperwork alone would not earn her the respect of the troops. It would come from action, presence, and the ability to inspire even those who doubted her authority. The lieutenant, now visibly relieved, but still nervous, cleared his throat. "Welcome back, Mom." "Sir? Colonel Hayes, the base is yours to command." Samantha gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Let's get to work." As she walked toward the headquarters building, the sun glinting off her polished boots, she felt a familiar sense of purpose. Fort Sterling had been waiting for someone who would restore its honor, rebuild its strength, and demand excellence. And she had arrived. For the guards at the gate, and for everyone who had doubted her, there would be no forgetting this moment. The woman they had hesitated to let enter was no ordinary officer. She was Colonel Samantha Hayes, and her command had begun. The halls of Fort Sterling had grown quiet as the morning sun climbed higher. Word of Colonel Samantha Hayes' arrival spread like wildfire, whispered from the mess hall to the barracks, over radios and coffee breaks, carried by officers and enlisted alike. "Did you hear?" a young private murmured to his bunkmate. "A woman? Leading us? I don't know if I can take orders from her." His friend chuckled nervously, unsure whether to mock or admire. The base had long been a place where tradition outweighed innovation, where old habits lingered and change was slow to arrive. Meanwhile, Samantha Hayes moved through the compound with an almost imperceptible purpose. Every footstep, every glance, carried a quiet authority that seemed to demand attention, even when she said nothing. Soldiers looked up from their drills, wary yet intrigued, sensing that she was different from the commanding officers they had known. Not all differences were welcome, especially when those differences challenged the comfort of long-standing routines. Her first stop was the staff office, a modest building of peeling paint and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Inside, the officers were gathered in semi-casual formation, papers and laptops scattered across tables. Conversations fell silent as she entered. A few tried to mask their apprehension with forced smiles. Samantha didn't smile. She scanned the room, her gaze steady and unflinching, making each officer feel the weight of her scrutiny. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm but unwavering. "I am Colonel Samantha Hayes, and I am here to assume command of Fort Sterling. I understand that change is difficult, but we will adapt, or we will fail. That is not an option." There was a pause, a fragile silence, hanging in the room like mist. The officers exchanged glances. Some were impressed by her presence, others irritated by the bluntness of her approach. One of the more senior officers, Major Trent Wallace, cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair. He had been a decorated officer for over a decade, known for bravery in combat and a stubborn adherence to tradition. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said cautiously, "the base has its procedures. It's been running fine as it is. We don't need radical changes." Samantha's eyes met his, unwavering. "Major Wallace, running fine is not the same as running effectively. This base has lost its edge, and my responsibility is to restore it. Resistance is natural, but it will not prevent progress." She didn't raise her voice, yet the room felt the impact of her words. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. Even as she outlined her plans, tighter inspections, rigorous training schedules, and accountability measures, the whispers continued. Outside the office, junior soldiers shared rumors about the new commander. "She's probably another paper pusher," one soldier said, rolling his eyes. "Too soft. Doesn't know what it's like in the field." Another disagreed, curiosity mixed with respect. "Maybe she's tough. They don't just hand command over without reason." Samantha moved quickly to establish presence beyond the office. She walked the parade grounds, observed drills, and spoke directly to platoon leaders and non-commissioned officers. She asked questions that revealed gaps in knowledge and lapses in procedure. Some officers bristled at being corrected, but she did so without condescension, framing every critique as an opportunity to improve. At the same time, she began to understand the undercurrents of resentment and doubt. Some soldiers, particularly men who had spent years in a traditionally male-dominated hierarchy, struggled with the idea of a woman leading them. The skepticism wasn't personal. It was cultural, deeply ingrained, and rooted in their perception of combat leadership. Samantha recognized this, and she knew that earning their trust would take more than rank. It would require action, proof, and unwavering integrity. That afternoon, she held a base-wide briefing in the gymnasium. Soldiers filtered in, some curious, some scornful. She stood on the raised platform, the midday sun casting shadows across her face. Her presence filled the room, commanding attention without a single raised voice. "I am here because Fort Sterling matters," she began. "Not to me, but to every soldier who trains, fights, and depends on each other here. Discipline, accountability, and excellence are not optional. You will be challenged, and some of you will resent it. But in the end, the success of this base and the safety of every soldier depends on how seriously you take your duties. That is my command, and it is non-negotiable." A few soldiers muttered under their breath, uncomfortable with the directness. Others nodded, realizing for the first time that someone truly competent was in charge. Samantha's eyes swept the room, catching the fleeting glances, the subtle nods, and the faint sparks of curiosity. She could feel the slow shift of atmosphere, not complete acceptance, but the beginnings of acknowledgement. Major Wallace lingered near the back, arms crossed, face tight with skepticism. He was used to commanding respect through his reputation and decorated service. Here, a woman who had been underestimated by the gate guards was now challenging his authority, and, by extension, his confidence. For the first time in years, he had to listen carefully, not because of protocol alone, but because every word carried weight. As the briefing ended, Samantha walked the grounds again, observing soldiers as they returned to their routines. She noticed small acts of carelessness, an improperly stacked crate of supplies, a half-empty fuel tank in a Humvee, a platoon skipping a crucial safety check. Each minor infraction was a sign of complacency, and she filed every observation for action. Later, in the privacy of her office, she reviewed reports, mapped training schedules, and planned corrective measures. She knew she would face resistance, both passive and active, from those unwilling to accept change. But she also knew that persistence, consistency, and example would eventually win over hearts and minds. Respect, she thought, could never be demanded. It had to be earned, step by step, day by day. Outside, the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting the base in a golden glow. Soldiers returned from drills, chatting quietly, still digesting the arrival of their new commander. Rumors would persist, gossip would swirl, but the foundation had been laid. Colonel Samantha Hayes had arrived not merely to fill a role, but to transform a base. The question remained, how long would it take before Fort Sterling recognized the woman who had already faced greater challenges than they could imagine? In the distance, the gate where she had first been questioned stood silent, a reminder of the small but telling moment that marked the start of her command. One day, she knew, those same guards would salute without hesitation. For now, the journey had begun, a journey that would test patience, challenge old traditions, and demand courage from every soldier willing to follow her. And as she closed her office door, the faint hum of the base seemed different. It was not quiet. It was waiting. Waiting for change. Waiting for leadership. Waiting for the moment when Fort Sterling would rise again, stronger, sharper, and under the command of a woman who refused to settle for anything less than excellence. The morning air at Fort Sterling carried the faint smell of dust, oil, and distant exhaust, the olfactory signature of a base long neglected. Colonel Samantha Hayes stepped onto the parade grounds, her polished boots crunching against the gravel, and surveyed her new command. From a distance, the base might have looked functional, but beneath the surface, decay had taken root. Barracks were faded and peeling, vehicles were caked with dust and rust, and drills had become routine exercises devoid of purpose. Morale had sunk to a level she hadn't seen in years. Samantha didn't rush. She walked slowly, methodically, taking in every detail. She observed a squad of soldiers attempting to maintain Humvees, one foot on a tire, another on the frame, tools scattered carelessly. "Lieutenant," she called sharply. The young officer froze, and heads snapped toward her. "How many of these vehicles are mission-ready right now?" she demanded. Silence followed. "Exactly," she said. "And exactly why we will start again. From zero if necessary." Her approach was deliberate. She didn't yell or humiliate. She acted. Samantha began cataloging issues. Fuel logs missing, maintenance checklists ignored, perimeter fences showing signs of rust and weakness. Each infraction was not merely a violation of rules, but a potential risk to the soldier's safety. Every soldier she observed became a part of her assessment, their competence measured not by rank, but by execution and attentiveness. That afternoon, she visited the barracks, walking through dimly lit corridors with peeling paint and creaking floors. Soldiers were lounging, some asleep, some fiddling with their phones, ignoring the dull hum of the base around them. She stopped by a group of privates tossing laundry onto their bunks. "This is not a hotel," she said quietly, yet sharply. "If you cannot maintain your personal space, you cannot maintain your responsibilities in the field. Discipline begins here." Some soldiers bristled, whispering under their breaths. Others looked on, realizing that the quiet authority in her voice carried more weight than any shouted order they had ever received. She didn't ask for compliance. She commanded it simply by presence and example. Samantha moved on to the mess hall. Tables were cluttered, and soldiers were leaving dishes to pile up without washing. She called the NCO in charge forward. "Lieutenant, I expect every area of this base to meet high standards," she said. "Start today. Begin with these facilities. If we cannot maintain cleanliness, how can we maintain readiness?" The lieutenant swallowed hard, nodding, and moved to relay orders. Other soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. They had grown used to leniency and neglect. Samantha's presence was forcing a reckoning with a culture of complacency they hadn't been challenged to confront in years. Later, she inspected the training grounds. Targets were faded, rifles improperly stored, ammunition logged inconsistently. Drill formations were sloppy, and the soldiers' responses lacked urgency. Samantha stood silently for a moment, letting the quiet settle over them like a weight. Then she stepped forward, giving direct instructions. "We will redo every drill today, from formation to firing practice. Accuracy, precision, and timing will be perfect. If it is not, we do it again. Until it is." The soldiers groaned, muttering about repetition and extra work, but Samantha ignored them. She moved among them, correcting stances, adjusting grips, and demonstrating precision herself. Some younger soldiers were struck by her stamina. She could keep pace with the drills, moving as if she had been out in the field just yesterday, rather than coming from administrative duties. For the first time in months, the base seemed to pulse with energy, a faint glimmer of its former discipline returning under her direction. During a break, Samantha gathered the officers in her office. "We have a long road ahead," she began. "This base has allowed standards to slip, and safety and readiness have suffered as a result. It is not a reflection on each of you individually, but on all of us collectively. Change is necessary, and it begins with every one of you setting an example." Major Wallace leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his face a mask of skepticism. "With respect, ma'am," he said cautiously, "these soldiers have been doing their best. We can't overhaul everything overnight." Samantha met his gaze without flinching. "I do not expect overnight perfection. I expect effort, accountability, progress. Complacency has no place here. If you cannot lead by example, others will notice. And I will notice. That is my responsibility as commander." Even Wallace, despite his doubt, felt the undeniable authority in her words. He had seen many leaders in his career, some charismatic, some strict, some brilliant. But none commanded attention like this. Respect wasn't demanded. It radiated from her. The first week of inspections was grueling. Soldiers worked harder than they had in years, adjusting routines, cleaning equipment, and correcting errors. Samantha was present throughout, observing, advising, and quietly noting those who excelled and those who faltered. No praise was given lightly, no mistake overlooked. She understood that leadership was a balance, firm yet fair, relentless yet just. By the end of the first week, small improvements were visible. Vehicles were cleaner, drills sharper, and the barracks orderly. Morale began to shift, though slowly. Soldiers who had initially muttered under their breath now nodded in quiet acknowledgement of her diligence. Her presence was a constant reminder that this base was being rebuilt from the ground up, and no corner would be left neglected. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Samantha walked the parade grounds alone. She reflected on the first week, noting the progress and the resistance. She knew that change would be challenging, that not every soldier would embrace it willingly. But she also knew that transformation required consistency and presence. Discipline wasn't achieved through paperwork or speeches. It was earned through example, persistence, and unwavering standards. The base was far from perfect, but it was alive again. She could see sparks of pride returning in the soldiers' eyes, subtle yet unmistakable. Every corrected procedure, every improved drill, and every acknowledgement of accountability was a step toward rebuilding Fort Sterling's reputation. Samantha knew the journey ahead would be long. Major Wallace remained skeptical. Some soldiers still doubted her, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. But she also knew one unshakable truth. Leadership was not about being liked. It was about making others better. And she was ready to do whatever it took to restore this base to its former strength and beyond. As night fell, The lights of Fort Sterling blinked on across the compound, casting long shadows over the newly organized parade grounds. Samantha stood at the edge, looking at the base as it prepared to sleep. For the first time in years, it felt as though the heartbeat of the base had returned, and she would ensure it never faltered again. The sun rose over Fort Sterling, casting its harsh morning light across the parade grounds, highlighting every flaw and every imperfection. Colonel Samantha Hayes had been awake for hours, reviewing reports, walking the barracks, and inspecting equipment yet again. She had anticipated resistance, but today the tension felt sharper. Word had reached her that Major Trent Wallace, the base's senior officer, had begun quietly rallying soldiers who were skeptical of her authority. He was skilled, experienced, and stubborn, the perfect storm of challenge for a new commander. As she stepped into the briefing room, Wallace was already there, arms crossed, leaning against the wall. A few officers she had begun to trust exchanged uneasy glances. "Morning, Colonel," Wallace said, his tone polite but laden with implication. "I hope you slept well. I wouldn't want your plans to be rushed." Samantha didn't flinch. She knew his game, intimidation masked as casual remark. "Morning, Major," she replied evenly. "I slept well. And yes, plans will proceed as necessary." Her eyes swept the room, locking briefly with his. She had encountered skeptics before, on battlefields, in training camps, and in hostile territories, and she knew that firm presence, not argument, was the key to maintaining authority. The briefing began. Samantha outlined the day's schedule, the objectives for training, and her expectations for precision. She emphasized that every detail mattered: timing, discipline, coordination, and accountability. Every officer and soldier would be held responsible. The words were direct, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Some nodded, some stiffened, and Wallace, as expected, remained skeptical. As the meeting progressed, he interrupted. "With respect, ma'am," he said, "I've been commanding these units for over 10 years. Some of your expectations, like repeated inspections and overhauls of drill procedures, may be overkill. Morale could suffer if soldiers feel micromanaged." Samantha leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Major Wallace, we are not here to coddle morale. We are here to maintain readiness, accountability, and safety. Morale follows excellence, not the other way around. If our standards slip, the consequences are real. I will not compromise the mission or the safety of my soldiers for comfort." A tense silence followed. Officers exchanged glances. Some admired her directness, others feared the confrontation brewing. Wallace, recognizing that he had underestimated her presence, tried to maintain control through reasoned argument. "Perhaps, ma'am, some flexibility." "Flexibility is earned, Major," Samantha cut in, her voice calm but resolute. "It is not a substitute for discipline. You will follow the orders issued and ensure your teams do the same. That is your responsibility." Her words landed like a hammer. Wallace clenched his jaw, but said nothing more, realizing that this new commander would not yield to debate. Her authority wasn't just formal. It radiated from her presence, knowledge, and unwavering calm. Outside the office, whispers of tension spread among the soldiers. Some wondered if the commander would clash with Wallace in public. Others speculated if she could really enforce change. Many had grown comfortable with mediocrity, and the new strict regime was a challenge they were unprepared for. Yet, even as whispers circulated, a subtle shift began to occur. Soldiers who had doubted her were forced to take notice. Colonel Hayes was not someone to be underestimated. The first field exercise of the day was a grueling combat simulation. Samantha had insisted on leading from the front. As the platoons lined up on the scorching parade grounds, Wallace muttered under his breath about unnecessary risk. Samantha ignored him, focused on observing every detail, every movement, every command. The drill began. Soldiers scrambled into position, rifles loaded, eyes scanning the terrain. Samantha moved among them, giving precise orders and corrections. A soldier fumbled with equipment. She stepped forward silently, adjusted his stance, and demonstrated the correct procedure. No scolding, no humiliation, just exact, clear correction. Those watching could feel the difference. This was leadership rooted in competence, not fear. Wallace, initially critical, began to notice the effect. Soldiers responded immediately to her commands, even to those they had doubted moments before. Her calm authority, paired with hands-on engagement, was transforming the energy on the field. He felt a pang of realization. She was earning respect the hard way, not demanding it through rank alone. Later, in the barracks, Samantha held informal conversations with small groups of soldiers. She asked questions, listened to complaints, and took notes on recurring issues. Some soldiers tried to challenge her subtly, questioning the need for repeated drills or stricter inspections, but she answered calmly and with facts. "If we fail to meet standards now," she said quietly, "we risk lives later. This isn't about punishment. It's about preparedness." Even those most resistant began to see her perspective. Her presence demanded attention, her reasoning commanded understanding, and her actions demonstrated competence. Slowly, a few soldiers whispered to each other, "Maybe she knows what she's doing." By late afternoon, Wallace approached her privately. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "I underestimated you. Your approach. It works. But some of the troops still resist. We'll need time." Samantha looked at him, her expression neutral but firm. "Major, respect and discipline are not immediate. They are cultivated over time, through consistency and example. Your job is to follow, guide, and enforce. Do not let skepticism cloud your duties." Wallace nodded, swallowing a measure of pride. He realized that the base had changed, not yet fully, but the direction was undeniable. The soldiers' eyes, their movements, and even the whisper of compliance reflected a slow but steady shift toward her vision. That evening, Samantha walked the parade grounds alone. The air was heavy with heat and dust, yet a quiet determination hung in the distance. She reflected on the day's clashes and minor victories. Change was difficult. Authority could be questioned. Doubt and resistance were natural. But leadership, she reminded herself, was about unwavering resolve and the courage to act when others hesitated. In the distance, soldiers returned from drills, tired yet alert. Some glanced at her with renewed respect, others still skeptical, but all aware that this commander would not bend. Her presence had altered the rhythm of Fort Sterling. Complacency had been challenged, hierarchy recalibrated, and doubt confronted. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the parade grounds. Samantha paused, letting the quiet settle around her. The base was far from perfect. Resistance remained, skeptics lingered, and challenges awaited. Yet for the first time, she could sense the undercurrent of change, subtle, cautious, but undeniable. Major Wallace's silent acknowledgement of her authority lingered in her thoughts. Change would take time, yes, but the foundation had been set. Discipline would be restored, respect earned, and the base transformed. And Colonel Samantha Hayes was prepared to ensure that every soldier, officer, and staff member understood the cost of mediocrity and the value of unwavering commitment. That night, Fort Sterling slept under a sky streaked with orange and violet. The base was alive again, but not yet whole. Tomorrow would bring another day of challenges, another opportunity to prove her leadership, and another test of the resolve that had carried her through battlefields far away. Colonel Hayes had arrived to command, and no obstacle, no resistance, and no doubt would stand in her way. The morning sun burned high over Fort Sterling, the desert heat rising in waves from the cracked parade grounds. Today was more than a drill. It was the first full-scale field exercise since Colonel Samantha Hayes had assumed command. Every soldier, officer, and non-commissioned officer had been briefed, and the tension in the air was palpable. Whispers carried through the ranks. Some doubted her ability, others were curious, and a few quietly hoped she would prove them wrong. Samantha stood at the edge of the field, surveying the organized chaos. Platoons were arrayed across a simulated battlefield, Humvees positioned strategically, troops in various firing stances, and the sound of radios crackling orders into the wind. For many soldiers, drills had been mundane exercises of repetition. Today, it would be a test of precision, coordination, and leadership. Instead of commanding from headquarters, Samantha moved forward, choosing to be in the thick of the exercise. Her boots kicked up dust as she navigated between squads, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp, voice steady. Adjust your formation. Eyes up. Communicate your positions. She called, correcting mistakes as swiftly as they occurred. Her presence demanded attention, not through rank alone, but through competence and action. Major Wallace, observing from the rear, raised an eyebrow. For the first time, he wasn't sure he could predict her next move. The troops followed her instructions instinctively. Her voice was calm, precise, and decisive, a sharp contrast to the lax routines they had grown used to. Soldiers who had doubted her began to notice the results. Movements were smoother, coordination tighter, and mistakes fewer than any prior drill they had conducted in recent memory. A squad faltered near the simulated engagement zone. A private fumbled with his radio, and hesitation froze his unit for a critical moment. Samantha didn't shout. She moved swiftly, demonstrating the correct procedure and guiding the squad back into position. Her authority was undeniable. She wasn't just giving orders. She was leading, showing, and correcting in real time. The exercise continued for hours under the unforgiving sun. She coordinated the timing of simulated strikes, oversaw troop movements, and ensured that communication lines remained uninterrupted. Her eyes caught details others would have missed. A soldier with a misaligned sight, a Humvee with a minor mechanical fault, and a squad spacing themselves incorrectly. Every correction was immediate, precise, and executed without reprimand, but with clarity. By midday, whispers among soldiers had changed. Where skepticism had lingered, there was now curiosity and cautious admiration. "She's fast," one whispered. "Keeps up with all of them," another added. Even Major Wallace found himself impressed, noting how her decisions maintained momentum while minimizing errors. He had spent years leading troops, yet he had never witnessed a commander who balanced authority and active engagement so seamlessly. During a tactical maneuver, Samantha spotted a platoon hesitating under simulated fire. The tension was thick, and the soldiers' confidence wavered. Without hesitation, she moved among them, crouching low, speaking softly but firmly. "Focus on your objective. Trust your training. I am with you, now execute." The unit advanced with renewed energy, completing the maneuver with precision. Observers noted how her direct involvement inspired confidence in the hesitant soldiers, proving that leadership was not about standing behind a desk, but leading alongside your troops. As the day progressed, the exercise grew more complex. Communication lines became critical, timing of simulated strikes required perfection, and coordination among multiple units tested every skill the base possessed. Samantha's calm command and hands-on approach prevented errors from escalating, while also highlighting the competence of those who had adhered to her directives. By late afternoon, the exercise concluded. Soldiers gathered in formation, sunburned, sweating, and exhausted. Samantha walked among them, nodding at those who had executed flawlessly, gently correcting minor errors. Her presence carried authority, but also recognition, a balance that few commanders had mastered. The energy among the troops was palpable. Morale had risen despite the grueling conditions. Major Wallace approached her after the exercise, his usual skepticism replaced with quiet respect. "Ma'am, I misjudged the impact you could have," he admitted. They performed better than expected. You've changed something here." Samantha regarded him with a neutral but firm expression. "Major, this is just the beginning. Today was a test, a glimpse of potential. Excellence is not a single day. It is a continuous effort. We have the talent. Now we must cultivate consistency." Even soldiers who had been resistant began to understand the depth of her leadership. Those who whispered about her as too strict or overly meticulous now acknowledged, in quiet tones, that she was capable, confident, and perhaps exactly what Fort Sterling had needed. Her authority was no longer just formal. It was tangible, earned through action, competence, and presence. After the field exercise, Samantha conducted a debriefing. Officers presented their observations. Soldiers offered feedback, and she highlighted both strengths and areas for improvement. Her approach was direct, constructive, and respectful. "We achieved a strong performance today," she said, "but complacency will undo it tomorrow. Remember what worked, and remember what failed. Excellence is built incrementally, one decision at a time." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, the base settled into quiet activity. Soldiers cleaned equipment, logged reports, and prepared for evening drills. Samantha walked through the compound, observing the work. She noted the subtle shift in attitude, pride returning to those who had doubted her, diligence replacing laziness, and cautious respect replacing whispered skepticism. She paused at the edge of the field, watching the soldiers carry out final checks. For the first time since her arrival, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The base had performed admirably under her guidance. She knew there would be challenges ahead, resistance, mistakes, and unforeseen obstacles. But today had proven a critical point: leadership, through action, could transform doubt into respect, hesitation into confidence. As night fell, Fort Sterling glowed under the desert stars. Samantha stood alone for a moment, letting the quiet of the base sink in. Tomorrow would bring new drills, new inspections, and new challenges. But for now, the first major field exercise had proven something fundamental. A leader who led from the front, who combined calm authority with direct action, could inspire soldiers in ways rank alone could never achieve. Major Wallace's quiet acknowledgement of her command lingered in her mind. Respect, she knew, was not immediate. It was earned, day by day, maneuver by maneuver, drill by drill. And with this exercise, the soldiers of Fort Sterling had taken the first steps toward recognizing that Colonel Samantha Hayes was not just their commander. She was their leader. The base, once stagnant and lukewarm, had begun to awaken. Energy, focus, and a renewed sense of purpose filled the compound. The first true test had been completed. And while many challenges remained, one truth was undeniable. Fort Sterling was changing, and its commander was the catalyst. The morning sun rose over Fort Sterling with deceptive calm, painting the barracks and parade grounds in golden light. Colonel Samantha Hayes had spent the previous weeks transforming the base, restoring discipline, refining training, and earning the cautious respect of her soldiers. Yet she knew that progress was never linear. Change was fragile, and leadership was tested not during smooth operations, but when disaster struck. That morning, disaster came without warning. A convoy assigned to routine logistical duties had been dispatched under strict protocol. By midday, reports began trickling in: confusion, delays, and then the dreaded radio call. One of the vehicles had crashed on a nearby access road. Samantha immediately mobilized response teams, rushing to the scene alongside her officers. Soldiers were tense, whispers of blame circulating already. Who was responsible? Was it negligence? Murmured one corporal. Arriving at the site, Samantha took stock. The accident had injured 3 soldiers, leaving 2 vehicles damaged and cargo scattered across the roadside. Dust swirled in the hot air, mingling with smoke from a ruptured fuel tank. She knelt beside the injured soldiers, ensuring medics were administering care, then stood, her gaze sweeping the scene. The soldiers around her looked to her for guidance, some trembling with fear and anticipation. "This is not about panic," she said firmly, her voice carrying over the chaos. "First, we secure the site. Second, we ensure everyone is safe. Third, we assess what went wrong. We will find facts before assigning blame." Her calmness was magnetic. Soldiers took cues from her, moving with purpose rather than hesitation. Once the injured were stabilized and transported, Samantha initiated the investigation. Initial whispers attempted to place blame on the convoy's driver, the new recruits, or maintenance failures. She listened carefully, collecting reports from officers, soldiers, and logs. The pattern quickly became clear. Equipment had not been properly inspected, routine maintenance checks had been skipped, and certain critical logs had gone unrecorded. Months of neglect, predating her arrival, had created a silent danger. Back at her office, Samantha reviewed the evidence. She could have assigned blame to individuals, excusing her command from responsibility. Instead, she did something rare. She owned the failure. The fault was systemic. While she had instituted new standards, the base had been left in decay long before her command. Leadership, she believed, included accountability for both past mistakes and present performance. That afternoon, she gathered the officers and non-commissioned officers in the briefing room. Major Wallace and several senior leaders looked uneasy, knowing the weight of the conversation about to unfold. Samantha did not mince words. "This accident was preventable," she said, her tone calm but unwavering. "It was not caused by a single soldier nor by chance. It was caused by systemic failures we are now addressing. You will each review your responsibilities, examine your processes, and correct every deficiency. Accountability is not punishment, it is the path to excellence and safety." Some officers whispered nervously among themselves. Soldiers feared the reprimand, anticipating harsh criticism. But Samantha's approach was different. She emphasized learning from mistakes, restoring safety, and preventing future incidents rather than punishing past negligence. Her philosophy was clear. Leadership was measured by how problems were resolved, not how blame was distributed. Major Wallace finally spoke, his voice low. "Ma'am, some soldiers are questioning the intensity of these changes. After this accident, morale could drop even further." Samantha met his gaze, unflinching. "Major, morale is not built on comfort. Morale is built on trust. Trust that every soldier is competent, that every procedure is followed, and that every risk is minimized. If we fail in these areas, we fail each other. Trust is earned through accountability, and that is non-negotiable." She then addressed the entire base in formation later that evening. Soldiers stood under the fading sun, some still shaken by the incident. Samantha's voice carried over the rows of fatigued faces. "Yes, today was difficult," she began. 3 of our own were injured due to failures that could have been prevented. Mistakes were made, yes, but our response shows who we are. We secure our injured, we repair our losses, and we learn. That is leadership. That is discipline. That is Fort Sterling. Her words resonated. Soldiers who had initially doubted her were struck by her composure. She didn't seek to alienate or chastise. She sought to teach, to inspire, and to unify. Slowly, the whispers of criticism quieted, replaced by a collective understanding of responsibility. Over the following days, Samantha implemented stricter checks and maintenance protocols. Soldiers worked long hours to correct past oversights, revisiting logs, testing vehicles, and ensuring communication procedures were flawless. She moved among them tirelessly, demonstrating every inspection, guiding every step, and leading from example. Exhaustion weighed heavily, yet her energy never wavered, reinforcing the standard she expected from others. During one late-night check, she discovered a misfiled maintenance report that could have caused another accident. Instead of scolding the officer responsible, she used the moment as a teaching opportunity. "See this?" she said quietly. "Attention to detail saves lives. One small oversight can escalate into disaster. Learn it now so it never happens again." The officer nodded, silently understanding the gravity of her lesson. By the end of the week, Fort Sterling had not only recovered from the accident, but had improved its procedures beyond their previous standards. Soldiers who had been shaken found renewed confidence, understanding that their commander would not allow negligence to continue and would guide them through recovery. Major Wallace, witnessing the transformation, began to openly acknowledge her leadership, quietly mentoring his officers to adopt her standards. Samantha, meanwhile, reflected on the events from her office balcony. The base lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the compound. She knew that setbacks were inevitable, and that the measure of a leader was how they responded. Fort Sterling had faced a critical test, and through calm authority, accountability, and consistent action, the base had not only survived, but grown stronger. In the coming weeks, she would continue to reinforce discipline, refine drills, and earn the complete trust of her soldiers. But today had proven a fundamental truth. Leadership was not measured when all went smoothly. It was measured in moments of crisis, in setbacks, and in the response to failure. And Colonel Samantha Hayes had shown that she was more than capable of rising to that challenge. As the desert night settled in, the base hummed with quiet activity. Soldiers completed inspections, logs were updated, and for the first time in months, the barracks and vehicles were fully aligned with the standards Samantha had set. The lesson was clear. Accountability was not optional, and excellence required vigilance. The setback had tested them all, but it had also solidified the foundation for the transformation yet to come. Weeks passed since the setback, and Fort Sterling was no longer the base that had greeted Colonel Samantha Hayes when she first arrived. The changes were subtle, yet profound, felt in every corner of the compound. Barracks gleamed with organized precision, vehicles were clean and fully operational, and soldiers moved with purpose across the parade grounds. Where whispers of doubt had once circulated, there was now a growing current of respect, acknowledgement, and cautious pride. Samantha walked the grounds early one morning, her boots striking a steady rhythm against the gravel. She observed a platoon engaged in tactical drills, rifles raised, eyes sharp, every movement executed with precision. The same soldiers who had struggled under her first directives now moved fluidly, their focus evident, their confidence growing. One private glanced up and nodded slightly at her. A subtle gesture, but a sign that trust had been built. Major Wallace, who had once questioned her methods, had become a silent ally. He now implemented her directives without hesitation, guiding his officers to follow her lead. During a mid-morning briefing, he openly acknowledged her authority. "Colonel Hayes," he said, "the base is performing beyond expectations. Your leadership has set the standard." Samantha nodded, not seeking praise, but recognizing the shift. The officer corps was now aligned behind her vision. The first full-scale operational exercise under her command began that afternoon. Soldiers navigated simulated battlefield conditions, coordinated movements across varied terrain, and responded to evolving scenarios with precision. Samantha moved among them, observing, correcting, and demonstrating. Her presence inspired confidence. Her calm authority ensured mistakes were immediately addressed and corrected. One squad faced a particularly difficult scenario, simulating ambush conditions. Hesitation could have cost them the exercise. Samantha stepped forward, crouching beside them, giving concise, tactical instructions. Maintain your formation. Communicate positions. Trust your training. Execute. The squad responded with coordination and confidence, completing the maneuver flawlessly. Observers noted how her leadership transformed hesitation into decisive action. After the exercise, she gathered the soldiers in formation for debriefing. The sun glinted off polished rifles and crisp uniforms, reflecting the professionalism she had instilled. "Today was exceptional," she said, her voice steady and calm. Every movement, every decision, every response demonstrated the discipline and skill we have cultivated. Excellence is no longer an aspiration. It is our standard. Soldiers, once skeptical, now listened intently. Some nodded with pride. Others whispered among themselves about the transformation they had experienced. Even the most resistant troops had begun to internalize her expectations. They were no longer merely following orders. They were embracing the discipline, efficiency, and accountability she had instilled. The transformation was not limited to drills and exercises. Administrative processes had been overhauled, with logs meticulously updated, maintenance checks scheduled and executed rigorously, and communication protocols streamlined. Barracks were orderly, mess halls were clean, and morale was visible in small gestures. A salute executed flawlessly. A prompt response to orders. A soldier correcting a peer without hesitation. One evening, Samantha walked through the base after routine inspections. She observed soldiers repairing vehicles, updating logs, and maintaining equipment with a sense of pride. The hum of activity was different, confident, precise, and focused. The base was no longer stagnant. It was alive, efficient, and cohesive. She paused at the edge of the parade grounds, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. The base had faced resistance, setbacks, and doubt. Yet today, it operated as a unified, disciplined entity. She knew the transformation was not complete. Challenges would continue to arise, mistakes would happen, and leadership would always be tested. But the foundation had been laid. Trust, discipline, and respect had been earned. During a meeting with senior officers, Samantha addressed the progress. "We have achieved significant improvements," she said. "Discipline, operational readiness, and morale have all increased. But excellence is ongoing. We must maintain these standards daily, with vigilance, consistency, and accountability." Her words were met with nods, agreement, and a renewed commitment. The officers were no longer merely compliant. They were partners in sustaining the transformation. Even soldiers who had once doubted her presence now sought guidance. Privates and corporals approached her with questions, suggestions, and requests for mentorship. She listened, responded, and provided direction, fostering a culture of proactive engagement rather than passive compliance. The energy across Fort Sterling had shifted. The base now functioned as a cohesive unit, motivated by shared purpose rather than fear or obligation. During a routine drill later that week, a young recruit struggled with a technical maneuver. Samantha observed silently for a moment and moved to assist, demonstrating the correct technique and guiding the recruit through each step. The soldiers' confidence grew instantly, and a small crowd of observers watched with quiet admiration. This was leadership through action, visible, tangible, and effective. Major Wallace, watching from a distance, finally spoke to her privately. "Colonel Hayes, I have to admit, I never expected to see such a transformation in such a short time. The soldiers respect you, trust you, and follow your lead. It's remarkable." Samantha nodded, her expression steady. "Change is never easy, Major. It requires patience, consistency, and example, but the results speak for themselves. Respect is earned through action, not rank, and the soldiers of Fort Sterling have earned it through their effort. As night fell, the base settled into a calm, disciplined rhythm. Soldiers cleaned, organized, and prepared for the next day with renewed focus. The barracks were quiet, yet the energy was palpable, a base operating at its full potential. For Samantha, the transformation of Fort Sterling was more than operational success. It was a demonstration of what disciplined leadership could achieve, even in the face of skepticism, setbacks, and resistance. The base was no longer merely functional. It was exemplary. Morale was high, standards were consistent, and soldiers moved with purpose, pride, and cohesion. She walked to the edge of the parade grounds one last time that evening, observing the quiet hum of the base. The desert night stretched before her, stars glinting above, and the air was filled with a sense of completion. Fort Sterling had been transformed under her command. A base that had once been plagued by neglect and doubt now operated at peak efficiency, with soldiers who respected, trusted, and followed their commander. Colonel Samantha Hayes had arrived. To lead, faced resistance, weathered setbacks, and now, finally, commanded not only authority, but genuine respect. The base was transformed, not by rank alone, but through action, consistency, and unwavering dedication. She had restored excellence, instilled discipline, and cultivated morale. Fort Sterling was alive again, stronger, sharper, and ready for anything. And in the quiet desert night, Samantha knew that her mission had succeeded. The soldiers had learned the value of discipline, the importance of accountability, and the power of leadership through example. The base was no longer simply a collection of buildings and personnel. It was a unified force, capable, confident, and under the firm, steady guidance of Colonel Samantha Hayes. The first light of dawn painted Fort Sterling in soft gold, illuminating the parade grounds and barracks that had undergone a profound transformation under Colonel Samantha Hayes. The base, once plagued by neglect and doubt, now hummed with precision and purpose. Soldiers moved with confidence, drills were executed flawlessly, and a quiet but unmistakable morale radiated from every corner of the compound. The change was not just operational. It was cultural, deep-rooted, and undeniable. Samantha walked the parade grounds, her boots crunching on the gravel as she observed the soldiers performing morning drills. Every movement, every command, every response was a testament to the discipline she had instilled. Privates, corporals, and seasoned officers alike moved with synchronicity, executing maneuvers with a precision that once would have been unimaginable. Where skepticism had lingered, respect now thrived. Major Wallace approached her, his expression one of quiet acknowledgement rather than challenge. "Colonel Hayes," he said, his voice steady, "I've spent decades in this military, and I've never seen a transformation like this. The soldiers respect you, trust you, and operate at peak efficiency. It's remarkable." Samantha nodded, her eyes scanning the formation. "Major, they did this themselves. I guided, corrected, and set standards, but the credit belongs to the soldiers. Leadership is about unlocking potential, not claiming it." As the morning progressed, a full-scale operational exercise was scheduled, the final and most comprehensive test of Fort Sterling's transformation. Soldiers would navigate simulated combat conditions, coordinate multiple units, and execute strategies under stress. This was more than a drill. It was a demonstration of readiness, cohesion, and trust in leadership. Samantha moved alongside the units, observing, guiding, and intervening only when necessary. She remained a calm, steady presence, her voice clear and decisive. "Maintain your positions. Communicate. Execute," she called, correcting errors and reinforcing successful actions. Her presence inspired confidence. Her directives were met with immediate compliance, not out of fear, but out of respect. During a complex maneuver, a unit faced a simulated ambush. Hesitation could have resulted in failure, but the soldiers responded with precision, advancing under pressure, executing flanking movements, and neutralizing threats in perfect coordination. Samantha observed quietly, noting their efficiency, readiness, and confidence. The transformation she had envisioned was fully realized. After the exercise, soldiers gathered in formation, sunburned, fatigued, yet energized. Samantha addressed them, her voice carrying over the rows of disciplined soldiers. Today, you demonstrated what Fort Sterling is capable of. Every decision, every maneuver, every response reflects the discipline, training, and cohesion you have built. This is not the end of our work. It is the standard we maintain. Excellence is not occasional. It is our expectation. There were nods, murmurs of agreement, and even the subtle smiles of soldiers who had once doubted her. They had come to understand that her leadership was not about hierarchy alone, but about example, competence, and unwavering commitment. Where once there had been whispers of skepticism, there was now open acknowledgement of her skill and vision. Later, Samantha visited the barracks and common areas. She walked among soldiers, observing their routines, interacting with them personally, and listening to their suggestions. The culture she had fostered, accountability, pride, and proactive engagement, was evident in every detail. Reports were accurate, equipment was meticulously maintained, and morale was visible in the soldiers' demeanor. She stopped to speak with a young private who had been among the most skeptical when she first arrived. "Ma'am," he said quietly, I didn't think things would change, but now, it feels like we're part of something bigger. We're capable, and we respect you for showing us that." Samantha smiled faintly, her calm authority unchanged. "You've earned that capability yourself," she replied. "I guided you, but you made the choice to follow, improve, and commit. That is what true leadership creates, empowered soldiers who rise to the standard." Major Wallace joined her as she walked toward the mess hall, a rare expression of admiration on his face. Colonel Hayes, the soldiers. The officers, they're motivated, disciplined, and operationally ready. You've created something extraordinary here. Samantha looked out over the base, the sun casting long shadows across the parade grounds. Major, Fort Sterling was always capable. It needed direction, consistency, and example. Leadership isn't about telling people what to do. It's about inspiring them to reach their potential. That is what we've achieved here. That evening, the base held a formal assembly. Soldiers and officers stood in formation, the setting sun reflecting off polished boots and crisp uniforms. Samantha addressed the assembly one final time as the culmination of her tenure at Fort Sterling. "Fort Sterling has faced challenges, setbacks, and resistance," she began. "We have transformed those challenges into opportunity, setbacks into lessons, and resistance into strength. Every soldier here has contributed to that transformation. Discipline, readiness, and excellence are no longer ideals. They are the reality of this base." A collective sense of pride filled the air. Soldiers stood taller, officers exchanged glances of mutual acknowledgement, and even those who had doubted her leadership found themselves inspired. Her words carried weight, not because of her rank, but because of the trust and respect she had earned through action and example. As the assembly concluded, soldiers approached her, offering thanks, nods of respect, and words of admiration. For many, it was more than acknowledgement of her authority. It was recognition of the standard she had set and the potential she had unlocked. In the quiet hours after the assembly, Samantha walked alone across the parade grounds. The base was calm, disciplined, and orderly, a stark contrast to the chaos she had first encountered. She reflected on the journey, the gate guards who doubted her, the skepticism of Major Wallace, the whispers of soldiers resistant to change, and the setback that had tested her leadership. Every challenge had been met, every obstacle overcome, and the base had emerged stronger than ever. Fort Sterling had become a model of discipline, operational readiness, and morale under her guidance. Soldiers moved with purpose, officers executed flawlessly, and the culture of the base had shifted permanently. It was a legacy built not on rank alone, but on example, accountability, and unwavering commitment. Colonel Samantha Hayes knew that leadership was never complete. There would always be challenges, new soldiers, and unforeseen circumstances. But she had proven that with clarity of purpose, consistency, and example, transformation was possible, even in the face of skepticism and setbacks. As she stood beneath the desert sky, the stars shimmering above, Samantha felt a quiet satisfaction. Fort Sterling was no longer a base defined by doubt, disorder, or neglect. It was a base defined by excellence, discipline, and the collective strength of its soldiers, a legacy she had guided, nurtured, and solidified. Tomorrow, she would continue her work. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate what had been accomplished. Soldiers respected her, the base operated at peak efficiency, and the culture she had built would endure long after her command. She had arrived to face resistance, challenge, and doubt, and she had left Fort Sterling transformed, a testament to the power of disciplined, courageous, and unwavering leadership. And in the quiet desert night, the base slept, not as it once had, disorganized and doubtful, but alive, vigilant, and prepared. Colonel Samantha Hayes had arrived to lead, and she had left a legacy that would define Fort Sterling for years to come.